All right, so chapter 2 is focused on communication. And so the objectives, right, so the things that you should know after reading the chapter and listening to this lecture, you should be able to list the components of the communication model, which is very important for the RD exam, discuss ways to make verbal communication supportive and effective, explain the use of paraphrasing. You should be able to explain examples of nonverbal behaviors, discuss the impact of diversity on communication, relate ways to improving listening skills, and identify common communication barriers and how to overcome them. So looking at communication skills, so these are foundations for interviewing, counseling, and educating patients, clients, and the public, and increases the likelihood of professional success with clients and staff. And so that's one of the things that this book actually talks about throughout the entire book, is looking at counseling from a manager standpoint. So you're counseling when you're thinking of your clients, patients, etc. But you also have counseling which is actually working with your staff or employees, right? If you're coaching them or trying to improve behavior in a work environment. So looking at communication defined. So this is the process in which meaning is co-created simultaneously among people and is a learned skill. So again, it's the fact that I have what I intended, but then also what the other person is going to interpret or receive the message as. And so this is important, right, to develop a relationship with the clients and staff, to relieve anxiety, and to enhance recall and provide feedback, right, when we're using this process properly. So this is the communication model, and you'll see this is on page 27 of your text. And this is pretty much a very classic model in communication, and I would be extremely familiar with this, right? So this model basically explains everything you need to know for any testing or process questions that we'd be using in our class, but then also the RD exam, right, which is actually looking at the process as a whole, even if some of the minutia is changed. So you saw in that picture, so again, I would be looking at the picture while going through this. This again is on page 27. So you have the sender, which is represented in the red box with the S. And so the sender originates the thought or emotion, so what they're trying to convey in their head. They encode this into specific chosen words, and then the sender speaks first, right? So the sender is the first person to then try and get their point or their thought to the next person. You have the receiver, so again, this is represented by the red box, and then you have the R, so this is on the right side of the model. The listener decodes or tries to make sense of the message, right? They're going to process that information and decide how to respond. And again, so they're either going to respond verbally or non-verbally, right? So they can change their posture, they can look grumpy, they can look excited because you're telling them good news, right? But again, so they're going to respond in a variety of ways. Now you have the message itself. So the receiver interprets both the verbal message and the non-verbal message. And so one of the biggest things, right, is we want to make sure that they're in congruence, which is what you're saying matches the way you're acting. So if you had to give somebody bad news, and so you had to tell somebody they had a terminal illness, and you're just sitting there playing on your phone, and you're like, yeah, by the way, you've got stage 4 cancer, it's probably terminal, right? That's not in congruence, right? So your body language has to match what you're saying, which is if you actually care about the patient, you're going to be attentive, oriented towards them, etc. Now then we also have feedback. So this is the verbal and nonverbal response to the message. So again, you can tell if the client is going to become disinterested, right? They may change their posture, they may look away from you, they may look down, right? But we need to ensure, right, the messages are understood and communication is successful by, again, you're going to get feedback, and what you thought in your head, the message you were sending, right, is that actually how they understood it and what they actually then are able to verbalize back to you. And so again, the biggest thing, so face-to-face communication is a two-way sending and receiving process, and this is why you'll see that both red boxes in the model have sender and receiver. One is just the sender first and then to the receiver, and then that person is going to provide feedback and send it back, and the original person will then become the receiver. Now looking at barriers, so this is represented by the purple lines. So this is things that would then interfere with communication. So you have interference and distortions. So again, what I'm saying, I'm not using the best word choice, or someone's not able to understand it the way I meant it to be understood, or again, if I'm using the wrong language. Looking at psychological states, so again, if somebody's depressed or if somebody's very anxious, that's going to affect their ability to receive information or your messages. The physical environment, of course, so any background noise, which is very evident in hospitals with alarms, TVs, etc. You may have physiological interference. So again, somebody's physiological state, right? If their chest is pounding, if they just don't feel good, if they've just recovered from a injury, illness, etc., then again, that's going to affect their ability to pay attention and focus on information. And of course, cultural and ethnic backgrounds. So again, who's the counselor? Is this the way they would like to receive information? Again, your body language, etc. So looking at interpersonal communication, so again, this is between people. This is based on the relationship between the patient and provider. And so again, relationship-centered care is characterized by respect, mutual trust, and engagement. Now I know what you're thinking is, which is how do I achieve all of that, especially in an inpatient setting? And it's extremely difficult, right? So there's a big difference in inpatient counseling and education and outpatient, right? And so one of the things we talk about, which is building this rapport with patients, it's very difficult to do it in short notice in a clinical setting, because again, you basically have a one-time session with these patients. You have to establish that trust and rapport very quickly. So again, it becomes even more paramount that you have proper body language, proper tone, right? That your messages are being well understood, versus, right, you have time if you're outpatient counseling that you can slowly get the patient to open up more and build that trusting relationship. So verbal and nonverbal communication we talked about, this occurs simultaneously during communication. So again, what you're going to see is that people's body language, right? You're going to see, are they orienting towards you? Are they disinterested? Are they just kind of looking off to the side? Are they clearly, right, worried about something else, right? They're not really focused on the education. But they can say, oh, I'm super interested. But if they're playing with their phone, right, you can clearly see, right, there's a lack of congruence there, where again, they're saying one thing but doing another. Now again, we want to create a supportive climate with trust, caring, and acceptance. And some of these theories and how this works we'll talk about more as we move through the different chapters. So again, you have to establish, though, the fact that you are genuinely interested in helping this patient improve their life and improve their behaviors. And again, if you're just there for a paycheck, if you don't really want to do this, it will be very evident, right? Your patients will be able to detect the fact that you're impatient, you're in a rush, you're checking your watch, I've got better things to do today. And that really shows that you're not really caring, right? And so then, of course, they're going to respond in kind by becoming disinterested, right, and withdraw from the counseling session. So the 5 guidelines to create a supportive climate. So this is, we want to discuss problems descriptively, not evaluatively. Describe situations with a problem orientation, not manipulatively. Offer alternatives provisionally, not dogmatically. We want to treat clients as equals, right? We're talking about them being collaborators, and being empathic and not neutral or self-centered. And so now we'll take a look at those a little bit more in depth, but I would be making flashcards and have a very good understanding of these 5 guidelines. So again, we want to describe the problem descriptively rather than evaluatively. So we want to avoid judging behaviors, attitudes, and work. So again, this is things that, again, it seems common sense, but we don't want to tell the patient, it doesn't really seem like you're trying very hard, right? Then we're clearly judging their effort, their behaviors, as opposed to where we want to describe the facts and problems objectively, which is, we said we were going to lose weight, the scale didn't go down, how come, right? Is it, and then that gives them the chance to open up of, I had this problem, I had that problem, this was getting in my way and stopping me. But again, it's not the person themselves, it's simply, these are the facts, this is what we're trying to do, it didn't happen, let's talk about why. We want to make sure that we're problem-oriented rather than manipulative. And so the problem is it's very easy, especially it's very habitual to use what would be considered a manipulative technique, which is when you're trying to get somebody to see from your point of view, like, isn't this obvious? But again, that's not actually very productive for counseling. So we want to plan our opening marks descriptively, again, as we talked about previously, allowing for problem solving and avoiding pre-planned solutions. So again, if you're just trying to lead somebody to a path that you've already got planned for them and just do what I want you to do, then you're not really counseling and listening to them, right? You're just trying to get them to do what you want. We want to promote others initiating solutions, and again, this goes with our goal setting that we'll talk about, which is it needs to be client-driven. And again, repeating what you've understood, and we'll talk more about paraphrasing and making sure that you're understanding what the client or patient is telling you. Want to provide provisional rather than dogmatic solutions. So again, ideally the behavior changes and everything will be client driven. So the client will decide on appropriate goals, the client will reach and come to the right conclusion for the next steps. But if they do need some guidance, again, we want to provide it provisionally, which is we could try this or consider that. And they might be like, that's a great idea, I hadn't thought of that. And they might say, no, that doesn't really work for me. But again, what you don't say is it's my way or the highway, and these are the only options for your treatment. And again, we want to make sure that we're allowing for added information. So again, hopefully, right, as the patient does more of the talking and you get more insight into their life and behaviors, this then gives you additional, right, information that can be incorporated into what kind of changes they'd like to make or other barriers they may be encountering to their behavior change. Again, we want our climate to be equal rather than superior. So again, we're trying to build a trusting relationship, which is not well done if you come in and you just go, well, listen, I'm the expert. I've studied this for X amount of years in college. You should just trust me and listen to me, right? That's right. That type of tone is not very well received, right? We want to avoid being superior. We want to make sure that we're showing respect. And so again, we'll talk more about that throughout the chapter because some of that is going to be culturally defined of how you show that respect. Again, we want to emphasize collaboration. Again, it's not really I'm telling you what to do. I'm helping you determine what you need to do and how you want to do it, right? I'm really just your guide. I'm not telling you what to do. Now, that's different if you have like an employee and there actually is a specific counseling technique for directive where I'm trying to get you to do something like you need to clock into work on time. But that's not the same as if you're trying to work with a client or patient who's trying to change their behavior. And again, we want satisfaction in proving solution validity. So again, finding something that's going to work, right, that we know the client has agreed to and is going to show success. So we also want to make sure that the climate that we're creating is empathic rather than neutral. And so again, so remember empathy, so an emotional reaction similar to the reaction being experienced by another person, right, or trying to understand what they're feeling. Now this isn't sympathy, right? Sympathy is, oh, I feel bad, that sucks for you, right? That's not a useful feeling, that's not a useful emotion, that's not going to help us improve our counseling relationship. Instead, right, empathy is understanding what they're going through and how that might cause them stress or the feelings that they're having. So again, helping them find a way through that, you have to understand what they're going through. And so again, a lack of empathy may leave patients, clients, and staff feeling misunderstood because again, you're not listening to me, you don't understand what I'm going through, right, it becomes the common complaint. And instead we want to make sure that we do understand why they're having problems, and again, finding appropriate solutions or trying to help them work through it to find appropriate solutions. So looking at paraphrasing, so this is on page 35. This is one of the first specific skills the text talks about. And so this is paraphrasing, so restating in your own words what the other person has said. But again, we want to make sure that we're not overusing paraphrasing, otherwise we sound like a parrot. And so again, we don't just want to keep repeating back, you're telling me this, and you're telling me this, right? So we want to make sure that we're paraphrasing and saving that for critical information. And then ideally, right, if we do this correctly, and if there is any distortion or we haven't done it correctly, this will lead to additional disclosure when they go to clarify something or explain further how we were incorrect. And so there's an example. So we would paraphrase the following statement. So the client states, I've been overweight most of my life. I've tried many different diets. I lose a few pounds and then I gain it all back. Now again, the book cautions you, and this is on page 36, where we're kind of used to, and especially in this very clinical, very sterile language, what I hear you saying is, and so instead, right, we'd rather focus on being more neutral. And so it gives an example of, in the text, I want to make sure I understand this. Let me repeat what you're saying in my own words. It sounds like you're having trouble with regaining weight, that you've been overweight for most of your life, so on and so forth. Now we also need to consider nonverbal communication and image management. And again, I get it, it's 2020, it's not fair, it shouldn't be like this, we should be able to express ourselves. I get it, but if you want to work in a helping profession, if you want to improve people's health, then you're going to have to adjust to their expectations. Now again, we know that so our image and nonverbal communication is usually more influential than verbal. So again, our posture, are we leaned in towards them, right? Are we leaned back and away from them like we're disinterested? So we need to develop an awareness with our nonverbal language. And so again, because this is culturally defined, what you may think is appropriate, your client may not, right? So this does vary with culture. All right, you want to make sure that we can recognize nonverbals in others and that we're also interpreting them correctly. So the problem is what may be very attentive in one culture may be overbearing, right? And it feels like you're invading someone's space or you're asking questions that are too personal. And so again, it's how you convey that same level of respect and understanding. So again, it's that body language. It's, are you fidgeting with your hands? Are you being attentive? Right? Is it a healthy amount of eye contact, or is it unnerving and uncomfortable? And so we need to be alert to those nonverbal signals. So again, when we go to make eye contact, right? So not in all, but in most Western societies, right, especially in America, we're very much look at me when I'm talking to you, but that can be very unnerving in some cultures. So again, you have to make sure that you're interpreting the signal correctly. So what may be to you, they're disinterested, they're actually deferring, right, and listening to you by looking down. Same thing with appearance, where again, I know it's 2020, many people have piercings, tattoos, etc. But again, conservative is best, especially when you don't know what your clients are expecting. Handshakes, again, you can tell from body language, right? There's a healthy handshake, there's a limp handshake, and then there's that overbearing, I'm trying to dominate you, right? That death grip handshake. Again, when in doubt, use common sense. The same thing with the tone of your voice. Are you angry? Are you upset? Are you excited? Right? You want to stay more neutral, more calm, right? Something that could be acceptable in as many cultures as possible. Being aware of your posture, gestures, and touch. So again, some cultures are very touchy-feely. Some, it's an absolute no-no, right? Especially depending on if you're a male dietitian, female dietitian, male client, female client. Again, be aware of these things and that there's a large amount of variance between cultures. And so again, if you don't know, err on the side of caution, but you can always investigate and learn more, especially about cultures that are going to be commonly visiting, right? If you're in a clinical setting, again, what are the predominant cultures around you and being aware of their normal traditions. So looking at a positive affect consistently. So remember, your affect is how you appear. This is your body language. So, and there's more to it than that, but it's just how you can just tell, like, oh, somebody just wasn't interested in it today, or oh, somebody was having a good day. It's just part of this whole thing that you can see on someone. And so again, you want to generate concern through your own nonverbal behavior and disposition. So again, you can see if somebody's giving you a concerned look, if somebody's being attentive to you, right? Want to control the communication environment and send verbal and nonverbal messages that are congruent. So again, if you say you're interested and you're leaned in, you're listening, you look like you're listening. If you say you're listening and you're just sitting there staring blankly at your notepad writing notes, right? And that's kind of one of the big reasons for shorthand, right, is you can take notes while still paying attention to the person, so it looks like you're still engaged, which you should be, of course. But again, I know you have to take notes for when you do your charting later back in your office. But again, it's how you present that and how you demonstrate that to the client. Now again, we've talked a little bit about this, but looking at diversity, which is going to play a larger role, and especially as we go through the rest of the chapters, this is an entire dedicated chapter to this as well. So with increasing diversity, right, professionals are going to need to improve their cultural competency. Again, the United States is already a multiracial country, and this is expected to become even more prominent as we move forward. So again, I think the book quotes by 2046 there will be no minorities, right? So in which case almost all cultures, races, ethnicities will be equally represented. And cultures have their own communication style, languages, practices, beliefs about healthcare and food, values, customs, and specific food choices. Which again, I know what you're saying is that's a lot to learn. Exactly. If you want to be effective, right, you need to then, like I said, I would focus on first the cultural groups that are around your geographical area. So again, if you're working in Miami, it would behoove you to understand, right, the cultural differences with the Cuban population or the Haitian population. And if you were in San Francisco, it would behoove you to understand the cultural differences in the Chinese and Chinese American populations. Again, start with what's nearby and related to your practice, and then expand your cultural competency. So ethnic groups vary in how much they disclose and to whom. And so again, taking into account that, again, based on who the patient is, do they have their family with them, who you are, male, female, your level of authority, right? How much personal information will be disclosed to you, right? Versus, right, it may be much more general information or something that you're going to have to work on to gain that disclosure and build that trust. And so again, we're still focused on a patient-centered approach to communication competency. So again, looking at the patient's needs and how they best communicate. Now looking at listening skills, which again, there is a difference in hearing and listening. So hearing, I hear sounds. Listening, the process of receiving and constructing meaning from and responding to verbal and nonverbal messages. So if you've ever had a significant other, it's very likely they've heard you many, many times, but they may not actually be listening to the message you're actually trying to send, right? And I can hear the sound, right, coming in through my ears, but what does it mean? What are they asking? What are they actually showing or demonstrating with their body language? And so again, developing listening skills is a foundation for effective interpersonal relationships. This is just in both daily life and then specifically building that rapport and that listening with patients and clients. And so common issues related to poor listening is that many of us have limited or underdeveloped attention span. So especially in this era of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, right? Everything is immediate gratification, very quick responses, answers, right? You get a text, and if you don't get a response back immediately, right, it's out of sight, out of mind. But so we're very used to this very, very quick attention, very, very short bursts, but we're not very good at these long, specific periods of time where we have to pay attention. And so people don't listen to uninteresting messages, and instead they'll focus on what they like or benefit from. So in which case they may actually tune out part of your message and just focus on specific things that are of interest to them. And again, people base their judgments on non-verbal behavior. So even if you're saying everything right, if your body language does not match what you're saying, then they won't believe you. Other issues is that people believe the messages from the media. So again, they actually believe them more than they believe them from an individual. So again, there's something about the written source that again, they actually trust it more than when you're building that relationship with them. So again, you want to build that rapport, build that trust. So again, if you're trying to correct something or something that's an error in the media, why would they trust you more? Right? You've got to build that trust. You've got to establish that expertise, right, without being superior or overbearing. And so again, looking at being biased, prejudiced, and ignoring the concerns of others. Again, we want to avoid that pre-planned solution, right? We have this idea or what we expect, or we expect them to eat certain foods or act a certain way. And so again, there are cultural norms, but we want to make sure that's not influencing, right, how we treat the person. It's just things to be aware of, not things that every person from that culture, right, or race or ethnic group is going to act, eat, do, etc. And so lastly, how can we improve our listening skills? So listening carefully while remaining silent. Again, being objective. So again, we want to, again, not put our personal feelings into what the patient's doing. Watching for clues from the speaker and then hopefully interpreting them correctly based on cultural competency. Taking your time. So again, looking at the fact there will be some awkward silence. Again, not trying to rush through the process, which I know is very difficult in an inpatient setting. Finding the real meaning, which again can be done through paraphrasing, and responding to confirm understanding that again, so what are they actually trying to tell you? Are you understanding their message correctly? And again, then how do we move forward? And with that, that's chapter 2. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.